So before we talk a little bit about the verses themselves, I just wanted to point out, you'll see in your email that we're going to change the schedule around a little bit. That's because there are going to be two Sundays in late July, early August, or actually just early August, when I won't be teaching a lesson. And so because of that, I'm switching around the lessons we're going to cover, because I don't know about y'all, but I'm ready to get out of the Old Testament. And the New Testament lessons of the times I was going to skip looked really good. So we're going to do those. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end of this lesson. But all right, we're looking at Jeremiah 23, verses 1 through 8. And I'm going to read the verse and then tell you a little bit about each one. So verse 1, woe, this is Jeremiah talking. Woe to the shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture, says the Lord. So this passage begins with a warning to all of the leaders of the nations of Judah. Watch out. The shepherds would have been like the priests, the king, prophets, princes, anybody that was responsible for the people in any way. I am trying to figure out a way to not have that reflection, but I don't know how to do that. I will try. The shepherds were charged, as all shepherds are, with guarding and guiding the flock under the leadership of the owner of the flock, which would be God. But instead of protecting and guiding the sheep, these shepherds were exploiting and scattering the sheep. So not great shepherds at all. And you'll see that the verse ends with says the Lord, and we learned, I think last week, that's that prophetic formula that indicates that this is a direct word from God. Anytime it says the Lord, or declares the Lord, that's a direct word from God. Verse 2, therefore, thus says the Lord. Again, that's that prophetic formula that tells us this is from God. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, concerning the shepherds who shepherd my people. It is you who have scattered my flock and have driven them away, and you have not attended to them. So I will attend to you for your evil doings, says the Lord. So the warning is repeated a second time, and there is no doubt at this point that the warnings were from God, and they were a judgment from God about the leadership of the people. Basically, God was saying the shepherds didn't pay attention to their sheep that were in their care, and therefore God will pay attention to them. It's there's a little humor in there, I think, but verse 3, then I myself will gather the remnant of my flock out of all the lands where I have driven them, and I will bring them back to their fold, and they shall be fruitful and multiply. So in one breath, the prophet is proclaiming God's judgment, but in the next, he's proclaiming God's mercy. And we've seen that a lot in these Old Testament lessons. So the remnant is like, it's this little faithful portion of God's people that's always going to remain, of God's Hebrew people that are always going to remain. And God is making a promise to that faithful remnant, and the promise has 4 parts. The first part is, we just read in this verse, that they will return to the pasture, to the land that they've been promised. And here, Jeremiah repeats the covenant promise that we know well, be fruitful and multiply. God is going to enable them to bring blessing to the world, as he promised way back when. Verse 4, I will raise up shepherds over them who will shepherd them, and they shall not fear any longer or be dismayed, nor shall any be missing, says the Lord. This is the second part of the promise, to give the people new shepherds that would provide the protection and guidance that was part of God's covenant love. The new shepherds are going to lead the people back to the worship of Yahweh. And then they would also give the people hope that would drive out their fear. So all around, a good deal. Verse 5, the days are surely coming, says the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, and he shall reign as king and deal wisely, and shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. Who does this sound like? Well, this is the third part of the promise. A king from David's line who would rule as a king of Israel was supposed to rule. So like the Israelite king is supposed to be different from other kings, right? I mean, that just makes sense. The Israelite king was supposed to study the law and teach it to his people. and not put himself above it, above other people, but like follow the commandments and follow the laws. If he asked the people to do it, or if God asked the people to do it, he was supposed to do it too. Supposed to be a representative of Yahweh, to reign with justice and righteousness. And you can hear in this that there's a messianic prophecy here. There's a prophecy about Jesus in this vision of a king that was different from the kind of king that was normal back then, that they would expect back then. And we look at the New Testament, and in Matthew, Jesus looks at the people and he says he sees that they've been left without a shepherd, just as Jeremiah and Ezekiel had prophesied in the Old Testament. And Jesus repeated the warnings about the shepherds who were no more than hired hands, and he contrasted them with himself as the good shepherd. Jesus was pretty much saying he was fulfilling God's covenant promise to give a shepherd as a king. Verse 6, in his days Judah will be saved, and Israel will live in safety. And this is the name by which he will be called. The Lord is our righteousness. This is the fourth part of the promise. The people of God who, they've been divided into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, are going to be brought back together as the whole people of God. And then verses 7 and 8. Therefore, the days are surely coming, says the Lord, when it shall no longer be said, as the Lord lives, who brought the people of Israel up out of the land of Egypt, but as the Lord lives, who brought out and led the offspring of the house of Israel out to the land of the north, and out of all the lands where he had driven them. Then they shall live in their own land. So that's kind of a confusing verse in there. But the verse is explaining a little bit further about what the Bible means when it says that God's name will be the Lord is our righteousness. So the God of Israel was known as the one who rescued the people from slavery out of Egypt, right? And that's how Yahweh was known at that point. And God had formed the people into a nation during their wandering in the wilderness. But basically, God or Yahweh's reputation had been based on what he did for the people coming out of Egypt. But now the God of Israel was going to be known as the one who brought the people back from exile. So exile was kind of a repeat of their experience in Egypt because they were captives and, So the defeat and the exile of the people happened because the shepherds had led them astray, and like sheep they had followed. I mean, they could have not followed, but they followed. They followed the bad shepherds away from God and away from God's protection. But now Jeremiah is giving them hope that just as God had heard the cries of the people when they were in Egypt and remembered the covenant that God had made with Abraham, God would once again remember the covenant and restore the people again. So before you go back to reading your lesson in the email, next week we will look at the lesson from August 12th. So be sure you skip to the lesson from August 12th for next week's lesson.